Back on the show one last time to talk in depth about the new kickoff rule that's coming to the NFL this season. The NFL owners voted on this rule actually today, and it was passed this morning. I think the final vote was 29-3, so it was very popular. And reports beforehand thought that this was very delicate at the point of discussing it because as of late Monday, which was yesterday, sources close to the league weren't sure if this was going to pass, like I mentioned, because they only had 19 approvals in the sort of mock voting that they had on Monday. And you obviously need 24 for a new rule to pass. But today they voted on it officially now, and 29 people voted in favor of it, and 3 people voted against it. So that's a good sign. I'm very glad to see that because I was very excited to see this new format come into kickoffs, into the NFL, because the kickoffs have really been lost over the last year or so. Just in terms of the numbers, looking at it, the amount of touchbacks that have increased from 2010. In 2010, there was 416 touchbacks, and that increased tremendously to almost 2,000 just in 2023. Same thing goes for the return yards that were at 4,500 in 2010 and dropped all the way to 1,300 in 2023. That obviously wasn't going to sit well with the NFL, and NFL Competition Committee Chairman Rich McKay expects this new rule, new change to kickoffs, to have an average of 3 to 5 yards advanced field position, which will ultimately lead to more scoring, which is always something the NFL wants. And this whole movement was sort of started by the Cowboys special teams coordinator, John Fassel, and the Saints special teams coordinator as well. They sort of spearheaded and led this revolution of the kickoffs. They actually gathered over 50 special teams coaches at the NFL Combine and got all these heads together to start planning and proposing this new deal at the coaches meeting. It was obviously a great proposal I'm sure they provided all these numbers and stuff like that to back it up. And now the NFL is rocking with it. They've technically said it's a trial year. They're going to review it again in 2025, but I think they'll find good success with it, in all honesty. This new model is kind of taking some bits from the XFL and the sort of kickoffs that they do for the last 2 seasons. So they do expect it to have some success because it's worked for the XFL. And I liked it the way I saw the pictures and the rules. So getting into the rules and breaking down all the rules, I have them all written down here from the article I read. So just bear with me right now if it just sounds like monotone. These are the rules officially for the new format. The new kicking format has the kicking team will still kick from their own 35, but the other players, other than the kicker, on the kicking team will line up on the opponent's 40-yard line, which is new, and those players can't move, and the kicker can't cross the 50-yard line until the ball hits the ground or a receiving player in the new landing zone, which is from the receiving team's goal line to their 20-yard line. So that's a new aspect of it. The kicking team now starts on the opponent's 40-yard line, which is new this year. And talking about the receiving team must have a minimum of 9 players line up in the setup zone, which is between the 30 and the 35-yard line, their own 30 to 35-yard line. And they must have a maximum of 2 returners line up in the landing zone, which I mentioned was from the goal line to the 20-yard line. And just saying those 2 things, the setup zone is from the 30 to the 35-yard line on the receiving team side, and just 10 yards away on that same side of the field is the kicking team. So they start off a lot closer than they used to before. Getting into the kicks, any kick that hits the landing zone has to be returned, while any kick that bounces into the end zone from the landing zone must still be returned or downed for a touchback but that touchback starts at the 20-yard line if it hit any part of the landing zone and then bounced into the end zone. That's new. Before a touchback, any touchback was at the 25-yard line. So now, if the receivers in the landing zone let it bounce in that zone and still roll into the end zone and decide to down it, it'll still be a touchback for them, but it will be a lot further back than it has been in recent years. Any kick that's short of the landing zone, going out of bounds, or just doesn't reach the landing zone, gives the possession to the receiving team on their own 40-yard line. I think that hasn't changed, if I'm not mistaken. I think they got the ball, if they went out of bounds, at the 40-yard line anyway. Another kick, that any kick that hits the end zone directly on the fly and is downed in the end zone, so doesn't touch the new landing zone whatsoever, and is caught in the end zone on the fly and is downed for a touchback. That touchback will be at the 30-yard line instead of the 20-yard line because there was no bounce and the kicker hit it directly into the end zone. That one will be given a bit more leeway, and the team will start at the 30 this time. And any kick that's kicked past the end zone out of the field of play will also be a touchback at the 30-yard line. And like I mentioned, all kickoffs now are really returnable. There's no more fair catches that they tried out last year. It really decreased the amount of kickoffs and was really the main reason why there was no kickoff. So there's no more fair catches. And in terms of onside kicks, teams can't onside kick until the fourth quarter, and a team that's losing has to try that onside kick. Kickoffs after safeties will be from the 20-yard line, and teams that are kicking off will have the option to use a kicking tee if they so choose, but the setup zone and the landing zones won't be any different. And the last thing on these rules is that the penalties that carry over into the kickoffs will only impact the spot of the ball. So again, the landing zone and the setup zone will still be at the 30 to 35-yard line for the setup zone, and the landing zone will still be from the 20-yard line to the receiving team's goal line. Like I mentioned, those are all the rules, and now looking at it and reading through them, it helped to see it on social media as well, how it all breaks down. I think the major part of this was, if you look at kickoffs and why teams decided to just not take them and use the fair catch, was because of how much people were getting hurt, or quite honestly, on these kickoffs. You have these two teams lining up very far from each other, and gaining a lot of speed running down the field, and you have the receiving team trying to block them. You're going to have pretty serious and impactful collisions there, which lead more often than not to some pretty serious injuries. Concussions are always the biggest thing with the NFL. They're trying to limit those. So already starting them from that far and bringing them in closer, it might, you could argue, take away from, I don't know, the excitement of seeing them charging at each other. But I think still starting closer, you're still going to get at least good blocks, and you're going to keep everyone healthy, which is the biggest thing for the NFL, avoiding those serious collisions and reducing the space and the speed that you have some of these players at. With the scoring, and like I mentioned on a YouTube short yesterday, the scoring is actually low nowadays in the NFL. So by bringing it up and by increasing these touchbacks and encouraging more kickoffs, you're going to have better field position, I think, because I think the kickoffs are going to be a lot better with set blocks and with less space for the kicking team to try and attack and tackle the receiving team. I think the blocking is going to be better. You're going to see field position increase, which is what the NFL wants to do. And you're going to see more scoring, which is great for the NFL, great for TV ratings, and makes for a much more entertaining game, which is what most fans would want anyway. Like I mentioned before, the touchback, by hitting the landing zone and rolling into the end zone, I think that's great because teams can't just watch it roll in and still expect the touchback. You're going to start at your own 20 which is very hard to do and make a good drive out of that. I love how they're encouraging more kickoffs by including that rule. And it just adds more skill, I think, to more strategy to these kickoffs because before teams just booted it down the field and nothing came about it. It lost some of that flair. Now, if you want, you could add a bit more skill and strategy with kicks, trying to angle it in a way where it hits the landing zone and still rolls in to put the receiving team in a bad position. You could just decide to kick it into the end zone and make them start from their own 30, angling the kick somewhere where the blocks just don't line up right. And on the other side, receiving, you can have two players maximum in the landing zone, but that's the max you can have in there. You could always have one and have more blockers ready there to block for you and increase your starting position that way, which is a great way to counter it. But it does have some risk in there as well because that's a big landing zone, 20 yards of space for one person to cover, and you don't want that thing rolling into the end zone after hitting the landing zone. So I think it just creates a lot more little things that teams have to plan for, strategize for, get quality players, good returners, good kickers with good ball skills and movement on the ball. That just adds another dimension, I think, to the kickoffs that was really lacking. And some people will say that, traditionally they're going away from that. It's not what people want to see. They're taking away all the hard hits and stuff like that. That's just the way the NFL is going, unfortunately. They're trying to make it more high scoring, have the best players out there, trying to reduce injury. They're hindering their defenses with the hip drop tackle. And now, if you want to say this kickoff is taking away from the defensive side of the game, you can't have both, honestly. Both sides of you want to see more points, you want to see high scoring games, but you also want to see great defense. That leads to low scoring games. So unfortunately, you can't have both. And just on that aspect, moving on to the last part I want to cover before I wrap it up. The penalties, they didn't really touch on them, but I assume it's going to be illegal touching or illegal formation if people line up in the wrong zones or outside of their zones or touch the ball when they're not supposed to. They didn't really clear those up, but that's a question I have. And as well, just seeing the amount of field position and scoring, the way the NFL is trending right now, I think this was almost inevitable. I mentioned I was a big fan of it. I still share that sentiment. I think this is going to be great by bringing in more excitement. You're going to see more touchdowns, more strategy, like I mentioned. Something different to the game of football that it will take some time to get used to, like all these new rule changes do. But out of the three major ones that we've seen, I think this one's going to have the most success and bring the most positive reviews out of all the rule changes that have happened so far. So, again, I would love to know what you guys think. If you guys hate all of these rules, if you like one of them, which one do you like more than the other? I always would want to know what you guys think of those and what you think of what I said on those rules as well, if you share some of the same feelings that I do on the kickoffs and all the other new rules as well. But in saying that, that's going to do it for me on today's episode. As always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of this show's content and more of me, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube and the GSMC Podcast Network as well on YouTube, where all the live shows are recorded in their entirety. If you want to go back and rewatch a whole show, YouTube shorts are posted daily on there by me. Those are found there as well, on top of individual segment videos that you can watch if you missed a certain segment or you want to go back and rewatch a specific topic. You can do that. It's all on both of those channels. And one last reminder to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football conversations around the NFL, more topics, and more discussions with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Thanking you guys for tuning in once again, and I will see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to